Hello there and welcome to our Shield of the Sun video. This video is entitled New Mexico, 1947. In this video I'm going to describe a series of events that took place in New Mexico in 1947 that had huge ramifications on what we know to be the truth that is covered up within this government known as the Republic of the United States of America and even governments around the world. So before I get into it, let's think and reflect on 1947. 1947, right here in the state of New Mexico, a couple of incredible things could have happened. In 1947, discovered right here in New Mexico, history could have remembered that year as the year that aliens were discovered, or the year beings from an unknown realm were discovered. Either one of those would have been fascinating for people. It could have been people would have understood that intelligent beings who were not human were discovered right here in New Mexico in 1947. These beings could have been investigated, could have been analyzed, and a whole other situation and scenario and this whole other thing about history, which the Bible has always been talking about, could have been analyzed, could have been educated, could have been realized for people to consume. But instead, 1947 was the year where a whole lot of things happened, but according to the government, there was nothing to see here. Not a thing happened in 1947 in New Mexico. People saw a big weather balloon. And as we know, in New Mexico, it is the state, or considered the capital. It is the weather balloon capital of the world, is what it's often called. And people are so used to seeing weather balloons out here in New Mexico. In fact, I got acquainted of seeing weather balloons out here in New Mexico, that it's very clear that a person can tell the difference between a weather balloon and a spaceship, or even a commercial flight plane, or even all the planes that fly over to the bases that are underneath the mountains out here. But what's interesting also is that even a dog can tell the difference. And you would think that a specialized United States officer would be able to tell the difference as well. And in fact, he can. But for some reason, he had to tell people he couldn't. Isn't that interesting? 1947 was a year where military intelligence departments would never be the same again. History, the way it is written, would never be the same again. In fact, politicians who knew about this information would never be the same again. And what it would culminate to was that it would follow policies that would be horrendous and murderous, making the world to be never the same again. And it would lead to one event that would spill over in humanity according to the prophecies of the Bible. But to understand it right, let's talk about these events and talk about the year 1947. So how many people in New Mexico remember 1947? Probably not many. Many people have come and gone since 1947, but there are some still around who remember these events that are rather very interesting to behold indeed. So during the summer of 1947, it starts with a man named William Brazel. And William Brazel was nicknamed Mac. And William worked on the Foster Ranch in Roswell, and the particular wreckage site was actually about 50 kilometers outside of Roswell. And one day, while William was working, he came upon a wreckage site. Upon this wreckage site, he would find massive amounts of debris lying around. These debris looked strange to him. These debris had strange hieroglyphics upon the metals and the other materials. William, at this point, was baffled by what he saw. And at first he decided to ignore it, because he probably, according to him, thought that this could have been something with the Army airfield. So at this point he leaves it. But he became so overwhelmingly curious about it over time that later on, about 2 weeks after finding it the first time, he took his wife and son back to the wreckage. When he did, he was picking up materials from the wreckage site. As he was picking up the materials from this wreckage site, These materials consisted of odd-looking sticks. They consisted of toils and metal strips and things of this sort. So William took it back home and decided to play with it. And when he was playing with it, one day he decided to take one of these sticks. He took this stick, and then he took a lighter, and then he put the lighter or the flame to the stick. Now usually, if you take your lighter and take the flame to a stick, it would usually burn up the stick, or it leaves black smudges all along the stick, and it causes the stick to become very, very hot, of course, and probably set it on fire. Not these sticks. When William lit one of these sticks, the stick remained cold. It did not get hot at all. In fact, the longer he burned it, the colder it got. Not only that, but when he took the flame off of it, he found no black smudges nor any damage from the flame upon that stick. He then started to took these metal toils, these metal strips that were very light, almost like aluminum or like aluminum foil, meaning he was able to crumble it. But what was fascinating about it was that when William started to crumble this metal-like paper, the metal-like paper would reform back again into a seamless shape right there in his hand in a very odd and eerie way. He then decided to get his hammer and some tools, and he started to bang into the metal. And when he was banging into the metal, all of his tools would break. Every tool he would use, meaning the specific tools he used to bang these metal strips, all broke the moment he struck the metal strips. Meaning it shouldn't have done that, but it did. William became fascinated by all of this, and he became very nervous by all of this. Soon, William would contact the authorities, and when he did, he contacted a man named Sheriff Wilcox. Now, Sheriff Wilcox, who was the sheriff of Roswell at that time, he then went down over there to check out the site. And when he did, he was also baffled by what he was seeing. But as Wilcox showed up there with William and the two of them were looking at this site, a massive thunderstorm would come upon the area. A thunderstorm that was so bad that Wilcox had to stay the night at William's house. While staying the night there, William decided to demonstrate to Sheriff Wilcox the strange abilities these debris had. And this also baffled Wilcox to such a point that he believed that the U.S.'s government plane or one of their special projects was lying in a wreckage outside of Roswell. The next day, when the thunderstorm cleared, Wilcox would contact the Roswell Army Airfield, particularly the 509th Operations Group. The 509th Operations Group and this particular Air Force base was a base that one time housed some of the latest technology that the United States Army was engaged in. It also housed nuclear weapons as well, particularly two of them. One of them was used in Japan. So this is a rather interesting and top secret place at the time. And at that point, when Wilcox contacts it, their major at the time was Major Jesse Marcel of the 509th. Now, Major Marcel was someone who was very familiar with the government's latest technology involving the Army Air Force. So basically, to understand it correctly, he very much knew the difference between weather balloon and weather balloon debris and weather balloon technology compared to what he actually saw in the field that day. He knew the difference very, very well. Major Marcel, once he got the call, at first he did not believe anything the sheriff was telling him regarding the debris and the wreckage and the testimony of the witness. He thought the farmer could be seeing things and things could just be not what they seem. He thought basically someone could be making up the story. But Major Marcel was ordered by his commander to check it out, and so he does. But what is interesting to note is that he goes out there with a colleague of his and somebody else who shows up in civilian uniform, but somehow has authority from Washington, D.C. to accompany Marcel upon this particular visit. So 3 men would go out there who were sent from the Army Air Force Base in Roswell. So as that took place, they meet up with Sheriff Wilcox and they go out and they check out the site. Marcel was baffled, and he was highly impressed indeed. Marcel was 100% convinced that what he was seeing was what he believed to have been a spacecraft. And this is not the opinion of someone who's not an expert in the latest technology. This was the opinion of someone who was an officer in the United States Army and was sent and assigned to handle and hide and classify and examine the latest technology that the Army would bring before him in whatever capacity he was given. Therefore, he knew the difference between what he was seeing as advanced technology and the weather balloons that commonly flew around in 1947. With that being stated, Marcel would pick up a lot of these materials himself and pick up as many materials he could to load within the Jeep. They decided to drive those materials back to the Roswell Army Airfield. Once there, Major Marcel would show this to his commanding officer and their people. And the commanding officer and their people, they engage in the same type of test that William was engaging in. They started testing the debris to see if they can light these odd-looking sticks on fire, if they can tear apart these metal pieces with the technology and the equipment they had at the Air Force Base. They couldn't. Their materials would break. They could not do any damage to these debris. This caused the commander at the time to actually accept Major Marcel's report as is. And so the next day, the front caption read, RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. So for about a full day, and just for a full day, people believed in the United States that beings and a spaceship was found in New Mexico in 1947. But of course, the U.S. government became very, very upset, people at Washington, D.C., that this intelligence was released like that. So then officials in Washington, D.C., legally sent by the White House, had to crack down and go and take a little visit to New Mexico. And they decided not to come to investigate Major Marcel's findings, but they came to take those findings and take it somewhere else. They also told Major Marcel, according to Major Marcel himself, that the government ordered him to lie to the people and tell the people that he found a weather balloon, which would have made him look stupid. And Major Marcel was not a stupid man. With that being stated, Washington, D.C. was allowing themselves to make a fool out of one of their own officers, which makes us, as a military department within that factor, I'm not military, just speaking metaphorically, makes the Army look weak by doing that. But they had no problem with it because they really wanted to cover this whole thing up. So that's what they do. They tell Marcel, I want you to go in front of the press and play like you're stupid and tell people that you saw a weather balloon. So imagine to his surprise how he's being treated. Now the other guy, William Brazel, was an interesting story with him too. He actually, at first, went on the radio show, or the radio station in Roswell, told people the truth. And then sometime after that, usually about a couple days they said after that, he was spotted in Roswell. And when he was, what happened was several witnesses actually saw William being attacked by several men and thrown inside a government car, and that car drove off. William then disappears for a few more days. And then when he comes back, you know what he suddenly states? He suddenly states that he made the whole thing up, that he didn't find anything. He never contacted Sheriff Wilcox. This never happened. Case closed. Sheriff Wilcox was also told to keep his mouth shut as well. The radio host who accepted William's false testimony and his recanting statements noticed that when he left the radio station, he drives off in a car that they knew by his own salary he could not afford. So they asked him, hey, where'd you get the extra money for the car? It's a nice car. Actually, it was a truck, actually. And William told them in a very cryptic way, I did what I had to do. And that was it. And that is how the U.S. government decided to cover up those series of events. Not only that, but you may not know this, witnesses who started to talk about the Roswell event talked about the fact that there was a second crash site. This second crash site was not too far from the first crash site, And what was interesting about the second crash site is that it was photographed by pilots of the Roswell Army Airfield, who happened to fly by it and snapped a picture of a crash disk. And upon their picture, you can even see that there were beings in it. But they weren't for sure. They just knew there was a second crash site and they had to get to it right away. But the Army didn't get to it first. In fact, it was a group of nature students and their teacher who were the first to run in to the second crash site. These nature students, who were residents of New Mexico, along with their teacher, came upon this crash site happenstance, really, by accident. And what they found shocked them to no end. Not only did they see a crash site, they saw 3 beings lying along the site. These beings were your classic grays, if you will. And these gray demonic beings were 3. 2 of them were dead, 1 of them was still alive. As the nature students were watching this sight and were completely baffled by this sight, the Army then shows up, and the Army tells the teacher in a very matter-of-fact way to leave. As the teacher and the students do, they do recount their testimony some years later, some of them even recalling that they became very, very sick when they got near to the bodies. What is believed to have happened is that these 3 bodies were loaded up in Army jeeps, and they were taken to a hospital that was near the Army Air Force Base in Roswell. And at this hospital in Roswell, what would occur soon regarding all of that was that a medical doctor and several other medical magicians, if you will, basically doctors who were skilled at burn marks and other kind of surgical operations, if you will, they examined these 3 bodies. And while examining them, they then took the live being into another room where they attempted to question it, because these doctors were also surrounded by Army intelligence, and as well as people from intelligence departments and many other government officials converged on the hospital when these bodies were taken to the hospital. They tried to interrogate the live being while trying to save what was left of the other 2, where they basically couldn't revive them, as they reported that, whereas the other being, they found a way to treat this being. So this one being who was alive, what later happens with this being is that he is then transported from the hospital and he's taken to a hangar. And this hangar also belongs to the Army Air Force as well, and this was noted as Hangar 18. And what they built in Hangar 18 was a laboratory, and this laboratory was built before the being got there. And so this being was taken to the laboratory for further tests, further analysis, and things of this sort. They also filmed this being as well. They nicknamed this being, this live being that was found in New Mexico, the second crash site, and they named it as well. They named the being EBE. And the interesting thing about EBE was that EBE was noted to have been stored inside a government base, an underground base, for many years after he was discovered in Roswell, or discovered at the second crash site, which was outside of Roswell, but he was taken from a hospital in Roswell and brought to Hangar 18. With that being stated, the testimonies or the things EBE would say were all written in a book that were dubbed Yellow Book. And Yellow Book had a lot to do with bringing forth other projects and things that were based from him as well. And what was interesting about this particular thing was that the events of 1947 would lead to other events as well. So, 1947 in New Mexico, you had 2 crash sites. There was a first one and there was a second one. And what I've just told you was the story of both of those events. But there was a culmination as well. And this was more revealed from people like James Forrestal and other whistleblowers who were working within the government at the time. So it was believed what had occurred was that in late 1947, James Forrestal ordered a mission into Antarctica. The culmination of that mission led to contact with these demonic beings. And it was believed that a temporary deal was struck. And in the premise of this deal, these beings wanted to experiment on human beings because they claimed that they were a dying race and that they needed us for some reason. And the government liked all the toys and technology these beings were offering and were really, really interested in advancing their technology because of the politics and all these other things after World War II. So they made a deal. And the deal was that these beings can abduct us if upon agreement that they don't harm any of the abductees and that they wipe away all memory from these abductees as if it never happened. So the government gave them permission to experiment on us. And they went and did just that. And of course, they find out over time that these intelligent, peace-loving beings, as they called themselves, who dared to actually say they created us and things of this sort, they turned out to be liars, by the way. They turned out to be sneaky little snakes, by the way. They turned out to be very, very, well, unethical. And unethical is the light way of saying it, by the way. But to understand it right, these beings stated that their victims would have no memory of it, and most of them didn't, but some of them did. And later on, many of these victims who didn't have memory of it then ended up having regressed memories later on. The other thing they stated was they wouldn't kill anybody, but that turned out not to be true as well. What happened also in New Mexico the following year in Hart Canyon confirmed the worst fears for people like Secretary of State James Forrestal and others as well who felt like-minded with them, that these beings didn't come from another planet, they don't come from another star system, they're definitely not about peace, and they are deceivers and they are liars. So how did that all culminate? Well, they make a deal, and the first ones to break the deal were these so-called aliens themselves. In 1948, within the spring of 1948, in Hart Canyon, New Mexico, another ship was found, another crash site. When that one was found, the Army managed to get on that one right away. But what they found shocked them. This ship was loaded with human body parts. Arms, legs, heads, eyeballs, inside this structure that they found. And of course, this baffles the mind of those who had made the deal. Now, this deal was initialized by people who would eventually later on become Majestic 12. And Majestic 12 was born out of this deal from events that all started in 1947 in New Mexico, starting and dubbed the Roswell event. Now, in 1948, the U.S. government finds human body parts in one of the ships, and people are recollecting their abduction experiences, and now you got people writing books about it, and they find out that even Hollywood has knowledge about these beings that goes far deeper than their fictional stories. And now they're a little worried about the propaganda department. Now they're a little worried about the institutions of literary works. And now they're really worried about testimonies. And they're very worried about people finding body parts from these entities who would started dumping body parts in certain locations of their abductions. And according to military science, the reason why you dump body parts everywhere is to scare the inhabitants of the area, to let them know that something more powerful is upon them and is an actual threat to them. So that was confirmation that these beings lied, they broke the deal, and they're also a threat to humanity. But of course, you had people within government, a lot of them being part of Masonic organizations and Masonic lodges. These demon-possessed persons were willing to give the aliens a break, give them a deal. I mean, hey, maybe we just got it wrong. Maybe something went wrong. Maybe his head came off because they used their equipment wrong, or maybe it was something we did. Maybe we should be sorry. Let's try to figure it all out. Maybe we're not crying enough. Maybe we should just figure out what they really want, and maybe they'll stop hurting us. Well, people like James Forrestal was a lot more smarter than that, wasn't willing to serve them, wasn't willing to worship them, wasn't willing to think of them as their ants, as the ones who created the human race or any of that stuff, because they lied, basically. If they could tell you they created the human race and this, and that, and then go back on their word, what makes you think anything they said from the start was the truth? So he was very much smarter about what was going on. So what started happening in late 1948 and in early 1949 were these strange memos started to be released from Washington, D.C. And these strange memos actually had the serial numbers of certain files that were kept classified regarding the Roswell event. And it was believed that the leaker was James Forrestal himself, and they believed that is what impulsed President Truman at the time to fire him. But something weird happened to James Forrestal, and this took place in May of 1949. James Forrestal was found in May, where it was believed, and this is how they wrote it, that he threw himself out the window. That he just poor guy got fired, he got sick one day and just went completely crazy. No one wanted to deal with him, and he just launched himself straight out of a window. But for those who know better, here's what the truer story is believed to have actually happened. James Forrestal at the time was writing a book. And what he wanted to do was write a book based on his own personal experiences of what happened to Roswell and the policies that followed later. While writing this book, he was hospitalized for a nervous breakdown, and this actually took place when he had met with the being known as EBE. EBE was pretty much lounging in an underground base in New Mexico, also owned by the United States military branch, and was basically being protected for all the information he was willing to offer the government. EBE attacked James Forrestal one day because James Forrestal questioned EBE's honesty. And EBE didn't like to be questioned. Apparently EBE had a narcissistic personality. He attacked him so bad that it made James Forrestal sick. And so this sickness, combined with the things James Forrestal was suspected of leaking, caused Truman to fire him. Afterwards, James Forrestal, being a Christian actually, believed that people should know the truth because this was a dangerous matter that can end up destroying this country later on. He's right, by the way. So, with that being stated, they decided that James Forrestal shouldn't have anything to say. So, the CIA entered Forrestal's room, tied a sheet around his neck, and then fastened the other end of the sheet to a fixture in his room and proceeded to throw James Forrestal out the window. The weight of Forrestal's body would have caused the sheet to snap, sending his body to come crashing down to its death, according to another insider who was there along that time, who believed James Forrestal was murdered. Because you see, when James Forrestal's body was found, you see, what was also interesting was that though all of his things still were in his room, the book he was working on wasn't. The pages he made, the progress he made in this book, it was all gone. All of that information, gone. His work was gone. His body is lying on the pavement, and now they want to write him off as an unfortunate suicide victim. James Forrestal was one of the very first martyrs of this cover-up. So, 1947 in New Mexico was a year that a lot of us who do this work, even though we weren't there, we can never forget it. It's ingrained in our minds over and over again because it is the realities of what we deal with today. Many of us have experienced things that should be known and explained to us, but instead we deal with a lying government who cover up for entities that connect back to Masonic worship, secret society worship, and the demons of the past. Instead, they rather throw people out the window and cause other events in their lives to suppress that which is going to come out in a horrifying way anyway. And that is the nature of the cover-up, and that is the nature of the events that took place in 1947, right here in New Mexico. With that being stated, join me in a prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, I pray, Lord, for deliverance from all satanic spirits from this state and around the world. Pray, Lord, deliverance from all lying policy, and I pray, Lord, deliverance from all of those who would assassinate and enforce a wicked policy. Deliver us from the engines of secret societies and all the demons that they conjure and channel. Deliver us from our worst enemy, who is Satan, and open the eyes in this state of the great deception that is taking place now. I pray this prayer in your holy name, in the name of Jesus Christ, the King of heaven. Amen. If you'd like to donate to Shield of the Sun, please go to www.gofundme.com. Go to the page called Michael Herr Books and Education. You can also click the link below at the end of this video. We are very much a struggling ministry, and I can very much use your help. For those of you, my progress has been very slow as of late. Things have been very, very slow here. I can definitely use your help. I want to say God bless you to all, and I will see you next video.